Hi everyone, my name is Kendrick and welcome to ENFP Mail. Today I get to interview Chase Joseph. So welcome, man.
Thanks. Really, lots of thanks. And we have my cat at the same time. So she's
Yeah,
joining the show too.
he said he brought his cat to kind of make him look more friendly or something.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I could have just had like a cactus. I mean, that might be what's going on in your background, but
Yeah, it's a snake plant, but yeah.
Oh, a snake plant, fair enough.
Yeah. So to be 100% honest, man, I have no clue what your system is about. I know a lot of people love your system, and they brought it up to me. And, me and like a lot of people who mainly follow, the Davesuperpower system. Like, what is your system like? Like, can you talk about it? Because you're popular, among this personality niche. So, clearly you're onto something here, and I'd like to know what it is. And I think a lot of people who have not been exposed to your materials would probably be curious to see what your system is about. So,
Sure. So I'm gonna not rely so much on the anecdotes and probably try to be a little bit more direct than usual. But basically, the system is centered around something known as the type grid, which you can get at csjoseph.life/type grid for free. I give it out for free. It was given to me by a mentor of mine a long time ago after he roasted me publicly in Bellevue in front of a bunch of corporate bigwigs one time. That was a funny story. And then he gave me the type grid, and I realized that it was like the key to everything. And the type grid, it's true. It is fundamentally accurate. It is true. It's infallible. The only thing that people would claim that it's fallible or its fallibility is that they just don't understand the English language, and they don't understand what the words on the type grid actually mean. So I often end up spending time explaining what the words on the type grid actually mean ahead of time. And it's really frustrating, but then again, I just try to translate it in so many different ways, and we're getting better and better and closer to being able to translate it. But the type grid is basically you follow the temperaments and the interaction styles, as well as cognitive axis analysis and quadra analysis, and you are able to arrive to a conclusion. But just because you arrive to one conclusion on the type grid, you need to start over again and verify it by going in a different pathway. There's actually hundreds of different ways to use the type grid, but I just focus on those four because they're just kind of the easiest. Whereas the other ones, like we could use the Riemann dichotomies and throw that against the type grid, and it's really just insane. But yeah, and the type grid, according to my mentors, is based on, and the original version of it was based on Dr. Linda Behrens and Dr. David Keirsey, as well as basically Plato, because his work is based on Plato. So you're mixing Plato and Linda Behrens, and there's actually some people before Linda Behrens within the chain of custody as well, talking about interaction styles, etc. Even the people involved with the DISC system. And it basically combines those two dichotomies together in a grid-like system that you just use like multiplication tables, and you could accurately type someone super quick. And that's fantastic to be able to do that. But I went further and I started doing cognitive axis analysis, and I added that. And then I took the socionics quadras, and then I added that to the type grid to really produce something that increases accuracy. It's verifiable. You can constantly verify anyone's type or your type against it, as long as you know how to use it. And then you can easily type everybody. And then in terms of definitions of cognitive functions, that goes to Dr. John Beebe with his book, Energies and Patterns of Psychological Type. And then we can go like super, super deep from there. But on the surface, that's basically what the system is in a nutshell.
So you're pretty much asking the same question to people from different angles. So to kind of like ensure they're not full of shit and it's going to be an accurate result at the end. Kind of like the Strength Finder 2.0 test, where they're asking the same question over and over again, and then just to make sure that you don't have that much time to reply back, so that you would come up with a more objective answer. So
yeah,
with that then, like the same question from different angles, just to make sure that they're being truthful.
Well, no. I have to, I thought you were saying something else. No, actually it's more like they're all individual questions, But the thing is that it becomes a process of deductive reasoning. If you answer one question, because you have a whole bunch of questions, like so for example, we were able to break it down to 9 questions. We have 9 total questions, like on our test. We're about to release by the end of this month. It's a nice test. Took us a while to create. But if you answer one question, it will inhibit you from answering other questions because that means you could get an incorrect answer. The way we have it set up is that if you answer, other options will be taken away from you. If you want those options back, you need to uncheck that answer and start over again. That way it forces the user to answer in the form of a hierarchy. Here's 9 questions. Out of these 9 things, what do I actually know is true about myself? Here's all the information. Read it. Oh, this is true. I know for a fact this is true. I know for a fact I am direct. So they choose direct, right? I know for a fact that I am abstract. I am abstract. So they choose abstract. A bunch of options are eliminated. Once they put in 3 to 4 answers, they already have a correct answer, and the test fills out the rest for them because it will guarantee that they don't have an incorrect answer. Then they're given like a little video at the end that explains their type to them, as well as a little readout, and then they're good to go. It's pretty simple system, that they worked on, and just guarantees accuracy, provided the person taking the assessment knows how to answer the questions. But we provided substantial reading materials to them to be able to do that. And that's what beta testers are kind of working with right now, because the test is still in beta.
What if they don't know themselves? Like there's a question that says, are you a direct person? But they'll say, yeah, I'm a direct person, but really they're not a direct person, So
the reading material shows them something that they can compare against, which is the informative side. So direct versus informative. And for example, I can actually bring it up right now and read it to you if you want. Like, it's no problem. Yeah, okay, cool. We'll do that. Hold on, let me get into. Oh, I have it up right here already. Awesome. So direct and informative, okay? So like direct people prefer to direct, lead, instruct others, manage, command people. They're very commanding people.
Okay.
Whereas informative, they prefer to inform, educate, ask, notify people, describe things. And then it goes down to the next section, which is prone to. And directive is like, okay, people that are direct are prone to being overbearing. They're prone to be overly explicit. They don't explain enough. They're prone to aggression. They're prone to excessive forcefulness. Whereas an informative person is prone to being vague and ambiguous language, and they can be passive aggressive. Sometimes people tell them that they're being unclear, or other people misinterpret the context in which the informative person is speaking, or the informative person beats around the bush, right? And then the direct people aim to simplify things. They aim to supervise. They aim to be concise. They aim to tell. They aim to get to the point. Whereas an informative person aims to stir curiosity. They aim to explain. They aim to influence others. They aim to highlight. They aim to imply, right? And this can lead to them doing anecdote telling and having tact. They can be very subtle sometimes. They're very coy, and they have explanatory tendencies. But on the directive side, they end up exhibiting clarification and intent and certainty, restlessness and confidence, etc. But while that's a lot of information, we also provide scenarios where it's like, hey, here's the difference between a direct versus an informative scenario. So for example, a direct person would say, take down the Christmas lights. That's pretty direct. Whereas an informative person would say to, like, let's say this is a married couple, and she's direct and telling her husband, take down the Christmas lights, okay? Or she could be informative, telling her husband, and she says, are we going to leave the Christmas lights up all year? Instead, that's an informative way of saying the same thing, giving the other person the option to say something, right? So you have these little scenarios, in here that you can actually look at, and then once you've compared from one side to the other, you know which one you are primarily, and then you just choose that one on the test. It's really easy.
What if you're like in the middle somewhere? What if you're like the kind of person is like, oh, hey, I noticed the Christmas lights has been up for a while. Would you mind taking it down, please? It's like, what would that be?
Well, that's why we have the resources written the way that we have them. It's like there's no room for interpretation. It's all about what is your tendency? What do you do primarily? Because this is not static, okay? These are dynamics, right? So you do something in a primary way, or you do something in a secondary way, right? And so you are primarily informative, right? But you're secondarily direct. I'm also primarily informative and secondary direct. And so we primarily communicate in an informative manner. And sometimes when we're dealing with certain people that don't naturally respond to us due to like a lack of compatibility, for example, between our types, we have to go into other areas inside of our mind, essentially. So that's what's known as the four sides of the mind: the ego, subconscious, the unconscious, the superego, those four things. And then we go to a different side of our mind to try to facilitate that communication. And going into a different side of the mind would be a secondary communication trait. So for me, like, I'd be direct by going into my INTJ unconscious, basically, to solve a communication problem with someone that I'm talking to, right?
Okay, so you kind of have a sidekick, like a secondary use of something. You're not, it's not like black and white. You're just either direct or informative. You could have a secondary.
Yes, it's like subtypes almost, but yes, very similar to subtypes.
Subtypes. Okay, that's a good description of that then. Because I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, I'm a direct person, but I'm very soft the way when I'm direct with people. You know, it's not like aggressive and punchy. It's kind of like, you know, it's very polite, but it's still like a direct action. It's like, hey, can you please, you know, clean the dishes, or can you please put away, you know, the equipment. I work in the fitness industry, right? So I'll be like, oh, hey guys, can you please put away the weights right now? You know, just put them in the bins. You know, it's like I'm telling them what to do, but I'm very soft about it. You know, that's why I was kind of like confused by what you said at first. But then I guess when you said subtype, then I guess, as you said, I'm informative first, then direct second in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not being like, hey, you put that away, you know, not like.
Yeah, and if you were that way, that would be direct primary, like, go do this now. So,
yeah,
they can be really bossy people.
I'm just trying to compare it to like systems that I already know. So if you don't mind, if that's okay with you.
It's all good, man.
Yeah, because like I said, I mainly follow the objective personality system. So for them, they use like masculine TE and feminine TE. So people with masculine TE is more like direct with a tribe, right? It's like, hey, you put that away. While someone with feminine TE is like, oh, hey guys, would you mind like putting that away? It's like there's like a softer feel to it. So I don't know if you resonate with that at all. If there's like any sexual modalities to the functions.
There is sexual modalities, absolutely, but it's more close to the four sides of the mind. I like to think of it in terms of mature versus immature modalities to the functions personally, and that can change their attitudes. Like, you know, like the hero function can become the warrior function, for example. The teenager function becomes the parent function, etc. You know, those types of modalities is probably what I'd be more comfortable with. But that's not to say that there is not a masculine and feminine modality to cognitive functions. I believe there is. The problem is that it's not static. It's because when functions combine, because you have to think of yin and yang equilibrium in every single thing. So I'm a student of Taoism. I take Taoism very seriously. I maintain Taoism is one of you have to have knowledge of Taoism to really get that prerequisite knowledge and understanding of how the universe works, etc. And then you apply those Taoistic mechanics to analytical psychology, and you can start to see how the dynamics actually work, and it becomes like a governing dynamic system. And I'm borrowing from John Nash when I say that, who invented game theory. But again, it's a yin and yang equilibrium all the way across between each of the cognitive functions in different ways. It's like our souls are literally atoms, etc. And then you have electrons, protons, and everything moving around. It's the same kind of thing. So yes, there's positive and negative charges. There's masculine, feminine represented. There's immature and mature. All these modalities are actually happening to all of the cognitive functions simultaneously. It's just really hard to keep track of all of them. I mean, but it is a thing. Absolutely, it's a thing.
Can you elaborate on what you talked about earlier, where, you know, you had like the parent function, you had the teenager, the warrior. Can you elaborate more on that area?
Yeah. So this is an expansion of Dr. John Beebe's work in energies and patterns of psychological type. So, for example, the hero function is obviously the first function in your stack. It's also like, but the hero function, it's kind of immature. It's really immature. It's actually kind of irresponsible. And in order for one's parent function to be properly developed and get out of its teenager mode and get into more of a parent mode, so it's that responsible parent attitude, the hero function, because it's the first function in the stack, it needs to get to a point where it's actually maturing. This is why, you know, children and teenagers, adolescents, they're irresponsible. Then when a person gets older, it takes them a while to develop their sense of personal responsibility over time. And that's when the hero transforms into a warrior. Now, to use an appropriate story taken from the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. In this book, when they're explaining the warrior archetype of the mature masculine according to Jungian analytical psychology, they talk about how the difference between a hero and a warrior is that the hero, you know, goes and sees the dragon and he's like, look at me, I'm going to go slay the dragon. And then the hero goes and slays the dragon. He comes back to the town, look at me, I killed the dragon, let's celebrate. Big party, where's the girls, all that. That's the hero. The warrior, days before the dragon even shows up, knows the dragon's coming ahead of time. And then in the middle of the night, you know, he's sleeping with his woman, you know, and he puts on his armor, he gets his sword, he gets on his horse. It's like 2 a.m. and he heads out towards where he's already scouted the dragon's den. And he finds the dragon asleep in his den, and he slays the dragon. And then he comes back before the sun is even up, gets back into bed with his woman, and no one's the wiser. And then some guy comes out later and he's like, oh, I recognize this handiwork because he investigated the dragon being killed in the den. And then he comes up to the warrior and is like, did you do this? Why didn't you tell anyone? And the warrior's like, because I was just doing my duty. That's the difference. It's a form of personal responsibility. Okay. And that's the difference between the hero function, which will eventually become the warrior function over time. It's a journey of the immature becoming the mature over time. And every single one of the cognitive functions has these cognitive attitude dynamics happening where they're able to change from their immature form to their mature form. And yeah, definitely some of them have feminine or masculine traits. But the thing is that those aren't as important as the masculine or the feminine traits put forward within the 4 sides of the mind. That still supersedes that. Yes, down at that very basic level, when we break down all the Legos and the individual pieces, absolutely. You can see the difference in the masculine and feminine traits with cognitive functions that way. But when you put the Legos together and you're actually creating something out of it, it actually changes the game. This is why, you know, within men, you still have female traits within men, and why in women, you still have masculine or male traits in women. It's the same thing. It's primary versus secondary, yin and yang equilibrium through literally every aspect of psychology that we know.
Gotcha. So I have like several questions now based on what you said.
Oh, good.
I'm trying to narrow it down, so it's not to get too complicated, but let's start with the hero that turns to a warrior. So from what I understand from what you're saying, when you're the hero, you're kind of showing off your deeds. Like, hey, I'm really good at this, and hey, look at me, you know, give me that validation, right?
And that can backfire on people, and then which is an example of irresponsibility. You know, that's the consequence of that showing off aspect with the hero. You know,
and basically this is everyone's first function. So as an ENFP, it would be my NE. And then you're an ENTP, right? So it's your NE also. And for someone else, it would be like, it could be their NI, it could be their SI, whatever, right? And then you get to the point of maturity or a warrior when you no longer need to show off. You're just doing what you need to do. You get the job done and you go back to your day essentially. What about your second, third, and fourth function? Like your second function, what is that then in your case? So if the first one's the hero, what is the second one?
The second one is the parent function, or colloquially referred to as the parent function, but it starts out as like a teenager. It's not really responsible at all. And the parent function is where a person's real, like when it's combined with the hero function, it helps get the warrior developed within the hero itself. But the parent function, it's known as the responsible function. And so you know somebody within their ego, because their ego itself is supposed to produce personal responsibility, right? And all the functions work together to produce personal responsibility, just like the subconscious produces humility. And if things aren't working together, it instead produces pride. And the same thing with the unconscious. The unconscious job is to produce wisdom, But when things aren't working together and it's all, you know, like disintegrated essentially instead of integrated, then it produces foolishness, right? And then the superego, when everything's disintegrated, it produces hatred when it's actually supposed to be producing love, actually. And those are the, you know, the four values or principles or things that is to be gained by an entirely integrated human being. And I discuss this all the time in season 19, which tells people how to be their best version of themselves, how to go through all those life phases for personal growth, etc. But the parent function is special. Why? Because the hero function develops first. It's actually the child function or the third function that develops second, because they're both primary functions. They're optimistic functions. But the parent function is pessimistic. So also is the inferior function, also known as the infant function. The infant function is very, well, it's infantile, but it's also pessimistic. But because of cognitive axis, you have your hero function, and then you have your inferior function, but they actually turn on an axis with each other. And what that means is what affects one affects the other. So the hero develops first because it's optimistic. The child develops after that because it's optimistic. But the next pessimistic function, people would assume, is the parent. Nope. It's actually inferior because the hero is already out in the field. And so its axis actually develops first before the parent. And then the axis for the child is actually the parent function. And the parent function, therefore, is the actual final function to develop within the ego. This is why Dave Powers talks about jumpers, because this is where this comes from. An underdeveloped parent function that's not matured yet, is basically what is called, what Dave Powers calls as a jumper, because these people are using a cognitive loop between their hero function and their child function at the same time. They're both getting together and they're up to interesting things. And there's supposed to be a parent function in there between the two of them, because the hero is flying around and saving the world, has the child riding on their back or whatever, and they're like, hey, look what I can do, look what I can do, look what I can do, right? And one day you'll be able to do this. And they're having a lot of fun together. And you know how the child is looking up at the hero, that loves the hero. Children love them Superman. They love them Batman. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. But the parent comes in, tells the hero, stop, stop, stop. And the hero's like, what? I'm saving the world. Okay, yeah, that's nice, but you're behaving like Hancock right now, like exploding into buildings and crashing into everything as you're trying to save everything. Instead, like, look at all the collateral damage. And you're teaching this little kid that it's okay, that it's justifiable to create all this collateral damage instead of like truly helping people. You got to be a little bit more precise. You have to be more responsible, Mr. Hero. And then the hero's like, okay, yeah, you're right, I shouldn't do that. Well, when the parent function is not there between the hero and the child, it creates a cognitive loop, and it leads to consistent immature behavior. Like, so in ENFP, what would happen in ENFP, for example, is that it's like, oh, people want me to do this. People will think better of me if I do this, you know, and they end up, it's kind of like almost creating a form of people pleasing, but it's for the sake of gaining their own status and their own reputation in the process. Whereas they have to realize, well, wait a minute, that might not be moral for me to do. And that's the parent function getting in the way and be like, wait, hold on. I don't feel this is a good thing. I get people would probably think better of you and they might want you and desire you more, but this is probably not, this is not good. We shouldn't do this. You know, where's the principles here? Where's the morals here, right? And that parent is getting in the way, being like that, you know, the moral barrier between the two. So when someone is a jumper, it just means that their parent function is underdeveloped. And they'll stop being a jumper later in life when they develop a higher sense of personal responsibility, which is the purpose of the parent function, essentially. And that's the process of it turning into going from a teenager to the parent, because it's taking that responsibility.
All right, dude, that was really good. I love that. But let me clarify the definitions first before we move forward, because you had some good stuff there. Okay, so the first one is hero that turns to warrior. Middle one is the parent function, basically teenager to parent. Third one is the child, so that would be your third function. So if you're an ENFP, it would be your TE. So does a child grow up to something? Do they morph into something? Child to something? You know, because the first two has a transformation, right? So that's
yes, it does. The child eventually becomes like squire or a knight or something like that, basically. Yeah, but that's only after you start developing your subconscious, is when the child start to able to go in that way. Whereas the parent getting from teenager to parent, you don't have to have subconscious development to actually happen in that area. And then the inferior function, also known as the infant, can become a king and wields king energy. And that's why oftentimes the inferior function is known as the high chair tyrant, that archetype, which is, according to Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, how they explain it. The inferior function is what the high chair tyrant actually is, until it actually realizes, oh crap, I should probably be king. It's kind of like the Emperor's New Groove and Emperor Kuzco. He's that high chair tyrant at first, and he comes back and he's like actually a true leader after having that disaster that he's been through. And that's the story of the infant becoming, and the high chair tyrant, basically, the tyrannical infant becoming this amazing God Emperor King like person who's generative and has humility instead of pride. You know what I'm saying? And that's literally the key to a person's happiness and their subconscious development, essentially.
Got it. Now, I'm not sure if I heard this correctly from what you said earlier, but you made it sound like your function can also deteriorate. So, it's so basically from teenager to parent, that would be like the growth path, right? But you made it sound like you can also go backwards, like you can deteriorate. Am I right?
It's not really so much backwards. It's more of like stagnated or stunted growth, I would say. I would imagine that human beings, like currently my philosophy is with these, is that you learn a lesson, you have to choose to move forward with it, you have to choose to grow, you have to choose to mature. But if you're not, you're just going to end up repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again until you learn it, basically. It's stunted growth. It's like come to a halt. I'm talking about that the functions, the way they are in their immature form, those are their default states. And then as life goes on, we grow, and then they get into their more well-defined and more developed forms later in life, provided our growth is not being stunted in the process, or we are not stagnating, or we're not too comfy, etc. This is why we need to have conflict in our life to guarantee that we're still there. And here's the thing. If our lives are stagnant, guess what? Life is going to throw obstacles at us anyway to get us out of that stagnancy, out of that comfort zone, and force us to grow. Do you know how we know? This is why we have things like quarter life crisis, midlife crisis, 3/4 life crisis, and final life crisis, the 4 life crises. And based on that, it's all as a result of our cognitive functions needing to grow over time. Life will throw us those curveballs, whether we like it or not.
Okay, and I find that really interesting because when I was trying to look at your system, like the way you're explaining things with the objective personality stuff, they're like, the message is similar actually. There's like the growth path. Definitions are different. There's some definitely difference in definition. One thing that strikes me as quite interesting is earlier when you're talking about like your function can be stagnated or you can grow, right? Because at first I was thinking more like, is it like the Enneagram where it's like a tug of war where like let's say you're a type 9 and your growth path will be like a type 3, and then when you deteriorate, you become like a type 6, right?
That's different, actually.
It's different. Okay.
That's. You want me to explain that?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I was kind of.
I can.
I was just clarifying to make sure that like we're on the same page here when you're explaining stuff. Okay, so do you think in life that one of our mission in life then is to go work on that 4th function and really develop it to make it like the emperor or the king? Because that's going to eliminate a lot of our life problems. Because I'll give me a second here. So like for example, like what Dave Powers would say is like let's say you're an EP, right? Well, your life problem is that you're too obsessed with freedom and gathering, and you don't have enough control. And because you're not controlling yourself, someone else is going to control you, and you're going to have like big tidal waves. And the tidal wave comes in a form of I'll give myself a personal example, right? So as an ENFP. I know you typed me as an ESFP, but like as an ENFP, before the COVID happened, I had debt that I was dealing with. Now because I knew that I wasn't controlling my money, like I wasn't saving it up. I wasn't using my SI to save my money. That it was just flying out, right? But before COVID happened, I made a conscious decision that I'm gonna start saving my money. I'm not gonna go crazy and like gathering. Going crazy on like gathering, because like apparently NE and SE is gathering. So gathering life experience, gathering things. I'm just gonna go focus on the task at hand, which is paying off my debt first. because the debt was making me a prisoner essentially. So because I went that direction before COVID happened, I actually paid off my debt completely, and I was like, oh my god, I just like escaped a tidal wave. And I was talking to Dave about it, and he was like, see the power when you're an EP and you practice self-control and self-discipline, you prevent this tidal wave from happening from you. And I was like, oh my god, I would have been in serious shit because pandemic happened. I'm now furloughed. I wasn't earning income, so I was like, I would have been in serious trouble. But I avoided that because I went with that SI, at the fort. So yeah, like I said, what's your take on that with that fort function? Like.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Like, I mean, I have to have self-discipline. Nothing gets done unless I have self-discipline. It took me a long time to figure out how to have self-discipline. And it wasn't until I actually got into like martial arts that I started to realize the importance of self-discipline and how out there people either have to make decisions based on willpower or they have to have the self-discipline to actually do it. Because sometimes, self-discipline, the way it is, with introverted sensing, you're either comfortable doing it or you're not comfortable doing it. And that's it. You have to force yourself out of the comfort zone, which can be painful, but eventually it can develop into a habit. And over time, you can have everything that you essentially want because of developing that self-discipline within your introverted sensing inferior function or the fourth function, etc.
Would you say that your, sorry to cut you off for a second here, but would you say though that your life problem was the reoccurring of not using your SI enough as an ENTP?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I would.
And do you have a story of like when it was like a huge problem and like when you went to the turning point when it wasn't like a big problem anymore? And
yeah. Actually, my first marriage, it was a horrible situation. I actually outlined how that works and how to social engineer ESFPs in that particular lecture, season 21, episode. Let's see here, episode 7, season 21, episode 7 on the channel, and I actually outline all of that entire process. But basically having the self-discipline to enforce boundaries is what became necessary, and that's kind of what helped me, read books like Dr. Robert Glover's Norm, Mr. Nice Guy, and understand that I have to take responsibility for meeting my own needs, and that has to be self-discipline. I have to have personal standards, which are rules that I have to follow for myself to guarantee I'm still meeting my needs. I have to have personal boundaries, which are rules that I put on other people so that they don't get in the way of me meeting my own needs. And then, and only then, I can start looking at my personal goals, essentially. And developing that entire framework from a self-discipline standpoint was really how I was able to get out of that rough marriage and get into freedom and a better life for myself after the fact, right?
So you would say that setting boundaries was one of your life problems, like growing up or in general?
Oh, certainly, because introverted sensing inferior people have this problem where we can be obligated to just about anyone and anything. And it's especially bad when you combine it with extroverted feeling child, because then it creates Stockholm syndrome. And then we end up enabling our captors. We end up becoming codependent to the people that are abusing us.
I want to loop back to your earlier when you were talking about jumpers and versus how those people who are supposedly jumpers later on in their life are no longer jumpers, and they're now following the functions that the correct.
Provided they don't stagnate, provided they actually develop their parent function, yes.
Right. So I wanted to ask you some question about that. So in Dave Power's world, the jumper is almost like a different type from, like let's say ENFP or ENTP. Like the jumper is almost like a completely different type. For example, ENFP, the jumper ENFP is NET, so he says those are NTs. If you look at their language, they're always talking about the reasons and stuff. But he also said that the function stack still matters. Like the order of the stack, meaning like your first one is going to be like the strongest one, the second one with the second strongest one. So would you say
it's providing a basic framework?
Yeah. So basically that kind of reinforces what you said, where yes, there are people who are jumpers, but should the person be developing their secondary function, their parent function, and they go from teenager to parent, then they're going to be okay. Then they're going to become their standard type essentially. Does that sound about right to you, or?
Yes, I guess kind of you could say that, but it's not so much really their standard type. It's more of like, hey, when you have your parent function developed, you've really reached a point in your life where you're like, boom, I'm at like the highest level of personal responsibility that I can go. I have that self-respect. I'm able to move forward and start working on developing the other sides of mind, because you can't just develop your superego right away. You have to develop all three other sides of your mind first before you can even start on your superego. If you try to develop your superego first, it's like literally the equivalent of making a deal with the devil.
And
It's too
which
expedient.
function is a superego? Would you say again? Sorry.
The superego is the inverse of your shadow or your unconscious functions. The inverse.
Your shadow functions.
It's also known as the demonic inverse.
Okay, so are you saying you need to work on your shadow functions then?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of this take before. Can you elaborate on that?
So how cognitive development works is that you have 4 gateways inside of your head. Okay, the first gateway is the hero function. The second gateway is your inferior function.
Okay.
The third gateway is your nemesis function, which is into the shadow now. And the final gateway is your demon function. Okay, these are the different gateways. And information can pass through these gateways similarly to neural pathways. And these neural pathways, due to neuroplasticity in your brain, within these gateways, within your personality, they, by default, are set up very chaotically. You may have pretty good neural pathway development within your ego, but in order to get to the other sides of your mind from a neural pathway standpoint, due to neuroplasticity, you basically have to practice using those functions over time to make them a strength. Because here's the difference. When you're going through a gateway and you're sending information through a gateway, that it's going to go in very chaotically, it's going to be an absolute mess, it may even be out of order, and it's going to create negative things. So what is the negative thing that's created by going through the first gateway? Irresponsibility. What's the negative thing that's created by going badly through the second gateway? Fear. Fear. That's the fear gateway, the gateway of fear. And then the third gateway, what's created when things are going in through chaotically? Well, it's the gateway of uncertainty and worry. And then the final gateway, when you're going through it chaotically, it's the gateway of hatred. It creates hatred. So in order for you to mature over time in your life, you have to practice transitioning into the other sides of your mind in order to develop the neural pathways necessary to handle the gateway, such that yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So based on that, so you have your gateways, you develop them over time, you have those neural pathways due to neuroplasticity, and then you're able to go through them responsibly. Now, the best example I could say that kind of really demonstrates this point is chapter 12 of the book, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Do what is meaningful, not expedient, okay? So when I say like a chaotic use of one's gateway, I'm really saying the expedient, fast way of using the gateway, not the meaningful way. Because if you are being meaningful by using your second gateway, you're not going to be afraid. You're actually going to be developing personal courage, and therefore you're going to end up gaining humility instead of covering up all of your shortcomings with pride. So like for an ENFP, for example, an ENFP has a fear of the unfamiliar. And based on that, it's hard for them to force themselves to have the self-discipline to do things that they're unfamiliar with, right? I have that problem all the time. And which means an SI inferior has to force ourselves with our second gateway to do things and experience things we've never done before. And we have to force ourselves to be in a comfort zone. Well, if we're going to look at an NI inferior approach, an NI inferior with expert sensing hero, an NI inferior is more of afraid of losing their freedom of choice and having their freedom of choice taken away from them. And when their freedom of choice is taken away from them, that translates directly to the hero, and it creates expert sensing rage in the process because they're so afraid of their freedom of choice done. But then the problem is that when you have SPs in that position, that's why they get put in the jail more than other types, because their freedom of choice often has negative consequences, negative experiences when they're using their introvert intuition inferior, basically, in an expedient way, and it causes negative consequences, negative SEs for other people around them. People get uncomfortable or feel unsafe by those people, and that's why their NI is locked up and they get thrown in jail because they're using their freedom irresponsibly, and it's creating negative consequences for other people, right? That's an example of an expedient use of introvert intuition inferior. A meaningful use of introvert intuition inferior, when they're developing that cognitive gateway to help get them access to their subconscious side of their mind at that point, they're able to use introverted intuition such that the choices that they make, they start to become more aware of the consequences of their actions. And then they make choices based on the comfort of others, whereas before they weren't considering the comfort of others, essentially. And this is what happens to NI inferiors all the time in their own personal growth and development. From an SI inferior standpoint, we end up really pushing the limits of our comfort and we end up later in life doing things that we would have never have done as young people. Like, for example, like I have a bucket list, and I never had the guts to do, longboarding, but now I'm learning how to longboard, and I'm doing it so I can learn how to snowboard, because I've never known how to snowboard, for example. And I'm putting myself in these situations where I'm uncomfortable and there's danger, etc. And then my SI inferior is growing, and it's being more meaningful, because then I'm building up the endurance and the perseverance to get through these negative things in life, which is the final result of developing one's introverted sensitive inferior, such that we could effectively outlast anyone else. The SI inferior can outlast literally anyone when it aspires, because it's using its gateway in a meaningful way. And this allows me to become the ISFJ, essentially, with my subconscious. Instead of a fearful ISFJ that's passing judgment on other people at all times, that's finding the innocent guilty. My ISFJ, who is developed in a meaningful way, is actually closer to true justice, essentially. Hopefully that makes sense.
I hear what you're saying, but in my head, there's so many contradictions that is kind of making me overload right now. So one of them is, you said that NE people are afraid of new experiences, while NI people...
No, SI inferiors are.
Okay. I misheard you.
Sure.
So the NI people don't like to lose their freedom of choice. Did you say that earlier?
No NI user wants their freedom of choice, but NI inferiors especially cannot handle their freedom of choice being taken away at all. They can't. They will rage. They'll get very angry. They have to, freedom of choice is everything to them. As long as they get their choice, it's fine. And this is what I tell people when they're in relationships with NI inferiors. Give them choices. Just make sure whatever choices you give them benefits you. That helps those people in those relationships.
The definition of NI I had before was a little bit different, where the people with NI, they don't like options. They like to narrow things down and just go with their known. So
no, that's introverted sensing. The familiar and one's own past and experience is introverted sensing. And you can look at this in Energies and Patterns of Psychological Type by John Beebe. The introvert intuition is more of their options. Options are everything to an NI user. And you want to provide an NE user, an extroverted an extroverted N creates options. They create choices and present them to the NI users to use, basically.
Okay, I think that's where Dave Powers has a complete different definition that book that you were mentioning, because he defines NI as, narrowing it down.
Well, they do narrow it down eventually once they know which choice they want, but all NI users like to have options and choices. But once they make the choice that they want, they will put all of their focus into that one choice only after the fact.
And I get the SI part, that makes sense to me, but the NI part is kind of what he defined differently. So
sure,
it's all right. I'm just here to kind of explore your take on things. So the way that Dave kind of simplified the personality stuff is, he said that people who are EJs and IPs are obsessed with people. So EJs they're good at taking care of the tribe, but they have that missing identity. So they have that midlife crisis because they don't know who they are. And then the opposite side is the IPs, where they're very good at doing things for themselves. They're, super self-above tribe, can be accused of being super selfish. And their tidal wave is tribe hate, where the tribe gets mad at them. And that's kind of the recurring problem. It's the tribe is gonna, gather up in a pitchfork and, take them down. And then
sometimes.
Yeah, and the flip side of things is the EP and the IJs. So the EP and IJs are supposed to be balanced with self and tribe, maybe 60-40. But when it comes to control and chaos, or gathering and organizing, they have a complete blind spot when it comes to that. So, for example, the EPs, will be very good at gathering, whether that be things or experiences. But when it comes to now narrowing it down and, coming up with like a, like basically coming up with a book or something to teach people how to do it, they have nothing. Well, like and then the IJ is the opposite, where they constantly just organize whatever they already know, and they don't take the time to gather anything new. And their tidal wave is chaos, essentially. That's why the IJs fear chaos and the EPs fear control. And that's his definition, at least. So I want to know what your take is on that. Do you think that's valid, or from your experience, like working with a lot of people and building up your system, or do you think that's completely like, oh, that's just crazy talk?
I mean, I could argue both ways, actually. Like saying an IP is, not very tribal, but I've known many of INFPs who are tribal. In fact, probably the majority of the problematic cult leaders of our time are INFPs. So it's and they run their own tribe. So that's one hole that I would consider. The other thing is too, when you look at an ISTP, they will have midlife crisis if they don't develop their ENFJ mentor side of their mind, which is their subconscious. They have to get to a point where they're willing to listen to other people with their TI hero, because usually they don't listen. They're like the most stubborn of all the types. Let's be honest. It's an ISTP. They're super mega stubborn.
Right.
But what they can do, if they learn how to listen, if they learn how to actually have mentors and masters that they learn from above, they become the most powerful mentor. And so it's oftentimes why you see ISTPs teaching music to a bunch of people, lots of kids, or metal shop or wood shop, or being ski or snowboarding instructors, etc., or swim instructors, or some kind of instructor of some kind, because that's what makes them the most happy, because that's from their subconscious side. And that allows them to get into that tribal mode. Like maybe individually, if we're looking at just egos only, you could possibly argue with that. But then again, to argue the point as well, because I'm trying to be as neutral as I can here, I am an ENTP and we're all about neutrality.
Yeah.
It's that, going back to INFPs, for example, it's not very tribal for someone like Robert Greene, who's an INFP, to write the book 48 Laws of Power, because it's not socially accepted at all. You see? So there's some differences there, but they're affiliative, whereas the other three IPs are actually pragmatic. The INFP is the odd man out. You see what I'm saying? And because they're affiliative, they're very interdependent. They want people to have agreement with them. They don't like making decisions necessarily that goes against the mold. INFPs are also notorious for outsourcing their thinking to other people. And they tell everyone else, hey, you better cite your sources. How do you know that? How do you know that? How do I know that? But they're also the first one who doesn't cite their sources. And they can be really lazy. They have that super high expectation of other people, but they seldom actually meet that expectation themselves. Unless, of course, their ESTJ subconscious is developed, then they start doing it. Again, it all comes back to cognitive development. So that model that Dave Powers is putting, yeah, there's something to it, but I think it's too broad. I wish it was a little bit narrowed a little bit more.
So it's oversimplified, I think, and you want it to have more.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the other one that he oversimplifies, which is IJs and EPs have problems with things, and IPs and EJs have problems with people. So when you listen to an IJ or EP or when you listen to an IP or EJ talk, the moment you pique their interest is when you start talking about someone or themselves, While like an EP and IJ, when you start talking about things like the weather or like this new gadget, that's when their like eyes like light up, So there's like.
So IJs, hold on, I gotta write something down so I can actually remember. So IJs have problems with things, right?
No, IJs and EPs, they have problems with things, and they're also more interested with things. But when it comes to people, they're balanced with self and tribe.
Okay.
Now.
Okay, so.
Yeah, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah. Go for it.
And then the IP and the EJ, they're balanced when it comes to things. They're balanced when it comes to organize and gather or control and chaos. But when it comes to self and tribe, when it comes to people, they're essentially imbalanced, and that's when they have people problems. So, for example, an IP would blame their problem to someone else, or they'll blame themselves. But it's always like a person. It's always people involved. When there's something wrong with our organization, for example, it was because it was someone's fault. While an EP or IJ, if there's a problem with the organization, they'll think, okay, there's something wrong with the system. It's like a thing problem versus like a people problem. So one person looks at the people as the problem, while the other person looks at the thing. as the problem. So do you think that's oversimplified, or there's any truth?
I think that's oversimplified as well. Like, so an INFJ would be more people focused as a result. They are part of the NF temperament.
Right.
They have extrovert feeling parent. They're all about the people and whatnot. And you know, so they have problems with things and they are more focused on people. Okay, yeah, sure. But then you look at an ISTJ and an INTJ, you know, okay, are they really balanced with self and tribe? You have extrovert feeling trickster there. They're not aware of social cues and social norms whatsoever. I think that would be a weakness, and I don't think they're balanced with self and tribe, especially since, you know, you have ITJs, for example, who consistently are just not aware of how other people feel. And in order for them to have good relationships with other human beings, they have to treat people like investment portfolios. They have to, because they don't understand how anyone else feels. They only know how they themselves feel, right? And how could they be balanced with self and tribe simultaneously? Because they're pretty balanced with self. They have FI child. But how can you be balanced with the tribe if you're not even aware of the tribe? So I have to teach them, you know, in their personal growth, hey, ITJs, have your relationships and investment portfolio. Realize how much you put in. Keep track in your mind of what you put into somebody. Are you getting a return on investment? Yes or no? If no, get rid of them. Get them out of your life. You know what I'm saying? So that's just one example as to why I think that would be an oversimplification. Also, do I have problems with things? Yeah, I do. Am I balanced with self and tribe? I would be more balanced with the tribe, but not so much myself. I have FI trickster. I don't know what I value. I have to go to other people in order to find out what they value. So then develop those value systems from there. I'd have to go to someone like you, for example. Hey, Kendrick, how do you feel about this? What's your opinion? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and that's because myself is technically out of balance. And I would use you to effectively bring myself into more balance from that self standpoint.
I think I was watching one of your videos and you were having a things problem. I think there was like a spider crawling. You're like trying to kill it or something. And I was like, man, he's having like a thing problem right on camera right now.
Yes, I am.
I thought that was pretty funny. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people are accusing you of being an INFP, right? Or like an ENFP.
I haven't heard INFP. I've heard ENFP. For the longest time, it was ENTJ. And then it switched to ESTJ. And then it switched to ENFP. So, and after that, I stopped keeping track. People keep posting all these different things, etc. And it's just kind of like, okay, what's going on?
I feel like right now it's on the ENFP right now. I think right now that's kind of like the word in the street is like you're an ENFP.
Okay.
I don't think you're an ENFP though, but that I think the word in the street is you're an ENFP.
All right, fair enough.
Because I like when you were explaining a lot of things to me today, you were using a lot of TI, and my brain was just fried. Right? I was like, okay, I have no TI, I have no clue, like what this thing is. You know, I have TE, right? I don't have like the deep introvert thinking that you do. So for me, I was like, yeah, clearly he's using functions that I have no clue of using. And I don't see you using TE either. So, you know, you're using more FE, right? So I was like, okay. I want to ask you questions. This is the last question that involves like kind of the Dave power system. And then I'm going to move on to some other stuff afterwards.
Okay,
but
sure.
According to Dave, the objective personality, you can be like an INTJ, but you can be an extroverted INTJ. Vice versa, you can be an ENFP and you can be an introvert ENFP. So basically, what he said is that every function has interaction with another function, and based on the order of the interaction of the function, you became a specific type. I'll give you an example. His official typing of me is NET, so I'm supposed to be a jumper ENFP. Play, blast, consume, sleep, masculine, feminine. So what his definition of that is, I'm NE and TE first, and then he said, secondly, I use my TE and my SI second. That's my second one that he said that I prefer to use. And those two are my saviors, he said, which is my default go-to when shit hits the fan. And then my demons, my first demon, he said, is called consume, which is NEFI, which is, you know, consuming new information for self. And then my weakest one, he said, is sleep, which is processing my emotions or prioritizing or setting boundaries, or, you know, just sleeping in general, like getting enough rest. So he said that's my weakest animal. That's what he calls it. And because of that specific order, I'm the most extrovert ENFP type according to him. Now, vice versa, he typed my girlfriend as a jumper INTJ, and he typed my girlfriend as NIFI, and she's sleep first because of that sleep processing, that NI and the FI, and then supposedly she's consumed second, which is SE and FI, and then her third is supposedly play, which is SE and TE, and her fourth, her weakest one is blast, which is getting started or explaining things to people or teaching people, which is NI and TE. So she's the most weird INTJ type, and she's supposed to be very introverted because her usage of her functions is, you know, sleep and consume first, which is NI, FI, and SE and FI. So, but on the flip side of things, he's also typed people as like super extroverted INTJs or super introverted ENFPs, and you know, all the different types. So do you think there's such thing as like a super introvert ENFP or super introvert ENTP or a super extroverted INTJ or ICJ or INFP or whatever? Like, what's your take on this? And do you think there's like interaction between the functions?
Kind of, except we call it cognitive focus. It's
Okay.
basically, so for example, take I'm an ENTP, but I'm an INTJ focused ENTP. So I can actually, where there is an ISFJ focused ENTP, right? And based on that, this is why ENTPs are often known as the most introverted of the extroverts. So for example, I go to like a party, and this is actually something that happened to me. I was invited to go to this party by people that I had never really even met before, but I showed up because I was bored. And I showed up and I was there, and I literally stood in one location the entire time, away from everybody else, just sipping on a drink. Like, I'm like, wow, that's like super creepy, but that's like literally what happened. And it's because I was uncomfortable. I was just super uncomfortable. And because of being so uncomfortable, I ended up, like I was basically like an introvert. I was behind the scenes, like, because I was in my ISFJ side because of how uncomfortable it was. Well, finally, after a half hour, the person running the firm or the party, basically, some INTJ dude, he finally like notices me. He comes over and he's like, "Hey, Jay, so what's up, man? Here, I'm going to introduce you to some people." And after you provided the affiliative introduction to other people with his extroverted sensing, and having a shared experience and facilitating a shared experience between me and some other people, and maybe even himself, then I was able to extrovert and come out and explain these things. Now, if I'm comfortable with somebody, I'm always going to initiate all the time, initiate, keep them in the loop, all of that, be an extrovert. If I am uncomfortable, I'm not really going to do that. I'm actually just going to go into my ISFJ side, which is kind of like a protective shell kind of a thing. And this is typical for ENTPs. We all do this. Now for me, myself, I was born in a very affiliative family, ISFJ mother, ENFJ father, ESFJ sister. So 2 FE heroes and an FE parent. And I have FI trickster. And basically I wasn't allowed to be who I am, essentially. I wasn't allowed. And not only that, I was also insanely depraved. And that depravity came with the presence of so many FE users. And then as a result of that, I ended up going deeper into my shadow because my brain was trying to compensate for the fact that everyone in my family is looking to me to behave morally, and I wasn't. But I had an FI trickster, right? So because of that, the neural pathways, I started using, the third and fourth gateways a lot more than the first and second gateways. As a result, I became INTJ shadow focused. So I'm able to use a lot of those functions a little bit better because I have those neural pathways built via neuroplasticity to actually, provide those cognition, even though they're really secondary traits. So my family and my upbringing forced me to focus on my secondary traits. And it wasn't until I moved away from my family and got away from them and was my own independent person with my own thoughts and my own everything, basically, then over time, I was able to like not be in that fight or flight mode of being in my shadow unconscious side of my mind, and then actually allow myself to be in my ego, basically. And that's when I started to, really be who I actually was, because I didn't have all those external social factors, that human nurture impacting my human nature in a negative way. So what this means is that depending on your cognitive focus over time with the 4 sides of your mind, you could actually end up favoring one of those 4 sides of your mind to handle various situations. And I think this is how, you know, Dave Powers is utilizing his, you know, savior argument, for example. It's just like, you know, my savior argument would probably be, you know, closer to something INTJ-ish, you know, as a result of that. So he's definitely on to something. I just fundamentally disagree with his approach. And I think it's really, you know, cognitive focus because, like, for example, personality is literally the same as handedness. You have a dominant hand and you have a secondary hand. Sometimes people have a hand assigned for certain tasks and other people have a hand assigned to other tasks. There's really no difference with our personality. It is the same as handedness. And over time, you know, even some people were actually forced to use one hand over the other, you know, in academic learning, for example. I'm primarily left-handed, for example, right? And, you know, you can actually learn and take on those secondary traits. And especially with how impressionable you are in your, for example, sorry, I was distracted. Someone sent me a message.
No worries.
It's just that, you know, over time, you know, you end up preferring, or it's easier given the nurture that you're faced with. Like I was faced with the nurture, the negative nurture of my family. The only way I could cope with that is to use my INTJ side of the mind to actually navigate that and get through it. Like my dad, like was trying to live vicariously through me, trying to force achievements down my throat. I didn't care about achievements, but he wanted me to be a high achiever. So I had to like work hard to be a high achiever just to survive, basically. So it became a survival mechanism for me to be more achievement oriented, which INTJs are heavily achievement oriented. Any TE user out there is an achievement oriented person, but I'm a TI user. I don't care. But my dad had TI inferior. TI inferior has this problem where they expect everybody else to listen to them, but they are not willing to listen to anybody. And TI users need to have people listen to them. And if my own father's not willing to listen to me because he has extroverted thinking demon, the lowest function in his function stack, that's not going to work for me. So I had to take on the role of extroverted thinker with my dad. And I would go into my shadow to do that. And that built the neural pathways through neuroplasticity to allow me to utilize my lower functions. And nowadays, I can do that. And this is why people are like, oh, you know, he's a TE user, he's too organized, talking for the whiteboard, blah, 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 all this. But like, I'm so random. Like, look, my day happens to me. I don't happen to my day. Like, seriously, I don't care. But they think I do. Okay. I don't care what they think either. If I was an ENFP, I'd really care about what other people think. But I just had this huge scandal yesterday and the day before on my channel because I went into Facebook, MBTI Facebook groups, and I started reviewing them on my YouTube channel, and people got really upset about that.
Yeah.
And like, okay, yeah, they got upset about that. But would an FI user who's so aware of what other people think of them willing to do that? ENFPs are affiliative. They're very interdependent. They make decisions based on people making agreement. You know, they make decisions. Another way of saying it, they like to conform. They like to have consensus. They like to build unity. They like to comply and mediate. You know, they like reaching approval. So, like, here's a good example between affiliative and pragmatic. An ENFP is affiliative, so they ask permission. They never ask forgiveness. They ask permission to do something. I'm pragmatic. I don't ask permission to do anything. I just ask forgiveness. I just do it, and then if it's a problem, then I ask forgiveness. That's proof positive as to why I'm not an ENFP, for example, because I'm pragmatic. You see what I'm saying?
Right. We've got 10 minutes left before we wrap this up. I'm actually going on a road trip soon, but like, so my, I was quite curious about what you said earlier about, you know, being raised by EJ parents, essentially.
Well, EJ and an IJ.
Yeah, EJ and IJ. And you come across to me as very tribe above self. That's just like the first impression I got when I was watching your interview with Benjamin. And you said that was nurtured upon you by your parents.
And my religious upbringing.
Now,
and I'm very anti-church, by the way, even though everyone thinks I'm some kind of fundamentalist Christian.
Yeah.
No.
But you said that when you moved out, you can finally be yourself.
Yeah.
Now, nature-wise, not because of how your parents raised you, but just being you per se, like, you know, what your natural tendencies are. would you say you're more of a self above tribe person or tribe above self kind of person?
Self above tribe.
Absolutely. So you think you're very selfish then, or you're more on the selfish side than serving the tribe side? Okay.
Oh yeah. I go out of my way to make myself my own mental point of origin. Why? Because no one else ever did. So I have to be the one to do it. I have to have self-respect. I don't care what other people think about me. And oftentimes, sometimes I care about how, people value me, but I've learned, it's like, okay, is this person somebody that I think that needs to be valuing me or not? Like the people that I really am truly loyal to, absolutely. But the people I'm not loyal to, which is like most everyone, then no. I very much maintain self above tribe every time.
Would you say though that's learned? You were talking about that neuroplasticity earlier. Would you say that was learned? That wasn't you before, and that's something that you had to learn as you grew older.
It was me initially, and then when my sister was born, that entire dynamic changed. I can remember as far back as being 1 year old. Like I can remember, I remember even having like thoughts that I would have as a child. I remember when my sister was first brought down, from the hospital, new member of the family. And I remember how much I absolutely did not like her at all, because it's like, wow, I'm not really wanted anymore. She's getting all of the attention, and she hasn't, like, it's just insane jealousy on my part. And before then I could just do whatever I wanted. It was great, but I can't anymore because now I'm being saddled with this responsibility and I hated it. And then I took on that tribal duty over time to get to that standpoint. Oh, thank you. Okay, make room. Making room. We're making room. Okay, cool.
You want some of this chili sauce?
Yeah, a little bit. Railgun, my wife, she's made pho tonight, so we're having pho.
Is she Asian?
Yeah.
She's Vietnamese or something?
Yeah. No. But she's just great, man.
Okay.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So I lost my train of thought when that whole faux thing happened.
It happens, bro. So you're talking about self versus tribe, and I'm more self.
It sounded like you had like a lot of self-awareness as a kid. Like you were already a kid and you already had a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
You knew this was kind of like what you were feeling and what was happening. So that's super cool that you had that self-awareness. Like I don't remember what happened when I was one, but I do remember I don't remember what happened to me when I was 1 year old, like you did. But I do remember myself when I was 3. So 3 years old is when I first had my conscious memories.
Sure you don't want more chili sauce in it?
I'm sorry, I'm doing this. And no, I'm good. Can you take that with you? Thank you.
Yeah.
It's all right.
But because we're limited on time, I want to ask you some questions about KRC now.
Sure, go for it.
There's a lot of stuff that you were talking about earlier that I'm not familiar with because I just haven't read the book. Like I read that.
I don't like KRC, by the way.
Yeah, I remember when you when in your interview with Benjamin that you said he stole his stuff from Plato. Yeah. But you still respect some of the good stuff that he has, even though you don't like him that much.
That's true.
That magician book, I read that a long time ago, but I don't remember anything about it. That's completely
King, Warrior, Magician, Lover?
Yeah, I read that book, but I didn't resonate with it at all. But that's why I just threw it out of my head after I read it. But like the KRC one, I felt like it had like a lot of good stuff in here. Like they had like a chart where they talk about like your self-esteem is tied to being altruistic or whatever, and I thought it was like a really good checklist, like self-esteem, self-confidence, and each of those was tied to something that you had to do. Like for example, if you were an SJ, I don't remember it was self-confidence, self-esteem, but it was tied to being reliable, so I thought it was a really good checklist to see if what type you are, and also which category you are, whether you're an SJ, SP, NT, or NF. Do you think there's any truth to those categories that they put in that KRC book? Where your self-esteem is tied to this, if you're an SJ, NF, NT, or whatever, SP. Do you think there's any credibility to that, or is that just like not useful, when
I think one's temperament is actually very indicative of one's life's purpose, and people put in a lot of ego investment in trying to discover that purpose and fulfill that purpose. And based on that, as a result, there's a ton of ego investment in one's temperament. So yes, I would say so.
You know which chart I'm talking about though? Like I can think of the book. I have the book here between. Do you know which chart I'm talking about? Like for
the chart of the 4 temperaments and the aspects of those.
yeah, like the self-esteem and the stuff and like whatnot. Like, do you remember that chart?
No.
Okay, no worries then. It's no big deal, man. I was just curious because
Just being honest, like I'm just, what you're saying to me makes sense. Like that's all I can really say, you know.
yeah. Okay. So we have 5 minutes left, so we're gonna wrap up the interview pretty soon.
All good.
I think I asked you all the questions I wanted to ask though, which is pretty good actually, and you answered most of it.
And we can always do part 2 if necessary.
Yeah. Well, if we do part 2, I want to cover the Enneagram instead. You know.
Okay.
But well, let's touch base on this right now. Do you believe that Enneagram is valid or not? Like, do you think it's a good system?
I think it's incomplete. I think there's some things that are missing with it, and the way that it's used today is not proper.
And why do you think it's incomplete?
The reason why is because when you look at Enneagram and you can look at cognitive focus, the Enneagram is actually really trying to take cognitive focus as well as personal cognitive development, you know, whether or not someone's stagnating or whether or not they're actually moving forward to their maturity through their cognitive development. And it's trying to mention both of those concepts simultaneously. This is why I'm very critical of Enneagram. However, Enneagram still has some of its uses, and I'll be releasing our own version in a different refined format that could actually help you separate those two concepts simultaneously. And then as a result, you'll actually be able to come to a more fundamental understanding of your own cognitive development as well as your cognitive focus as a result.
My next question is non-Enneagram related, but it could be. But like for your system specifically, what is the more practical day-to-day use that people can get out of when they're using the C.S. Joseph system?
Well, it's called 4 sides dynamics, but really the type grid. The type grid is the most practical piece. You can use the type grid to type yourself and others with 100% accuracy. And we also have, and I haven't really talked about this to anyone, but we have a visual typing type grid that we're going to be releasing soon. And you can use, which provides a whole nother set of vectors of which to use the type grid on. And it also increases your ability to psychoanalyze other people, understand their functions, get to know them, and, you know, a lot of different approaches. I highly, highly recommend, you know, checking that out when it is released. But that's the most practical part. And then obviously the definitions of the functions, and then really understanding one's personal growth journey, as well as decisions for sexuality, career, and parenting. I think those are the most practical uses. So typing oneself and others, and then sexuality, personal growth, career, and parenting.
And then for each of those categories, then they have specific steps that they can follow that's concrete that they can take action on right away, would you say?
Yeah, especially like you find this out mostly in season 14 and season 19 and season 23.
Would people want to comb through all that information that you have? Because there's quite a bit of like things that
it is quite a bit, but don't worry, we're releasing a textbook very soon. And we're also we're releasing our own test. We already have a visual guide. We're taking all of the content in the lectures and creating really easily digestible materials and making it ease of use and accessibility. You know, speaking of accessibility, people get all mad at me when I delete some of their comments on my channel, like, oh, he's censoring. It's like, no, it has nothing to do with the video. Talk about the video. That's all I ask. If you really want to yell at me and tell me I'm a horrible person, message me directly on Discord. Like, I'm very available. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's not that I'm inaccessible. I'm sorry the content is somewhat inaccessible, but we're fixing that. So.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier would be like how dense the content is, you know? It's like if you're a newbie, you're like, oh my God, like, I don't know where to start. There's so much, you know, there's so much here, you know?
Yeah, we're going to have a start here button on the front page of our website soon.
Yeah, that's going to help for sure. That's what you need for sure. Man, I had an important question. It just flew out of my head. It's so annoying. Jesus Christ. I hate when this happens. It was so important too. Oh. All right, man. I don't remember what it was. It's annoying.
Did it have something to do with the channel or the practicality of anything that we're doing?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I remember now. So on your interview with Benjamin, you said that you don't collaborate with other YouTubers often, but
No.
you were cool with doing an interview with me and Benjamin. So like, what criteria are you looking for when it comes to collaboration with other YouTubers? Is it because like me and Benjamin are like kind of like we're like low key, we're just interviewing other different personality types, or it's like it's like because you don't want to talk with your competition, or is it like what is like what is your criteria for collaboration with other YouTubers when it comes to the niche that we have right now?
It really is like, you know, what's going to be the benefit? You know what I mean? It's really the first question that's asked. I mean, is this like also cost benefit analysis? Is this like really, is this going to work? You know, the other thing is too, like, I get screenshots of from people all the time. Like, I got informants everywhere in various groups, tons of Discord servers where we're actually watching, you know, these YouTubers, and they're constantly trashing me behind my back on a regular basis. And it's like, okay, I thought you were cool. Apparently you're not cool. So I don't really want to go on your channel. Sorry. You know, that's,
okay.
I've had that experience with Megan Lavada. I've had that experience with Eric Thor, Emily Barnes, even though she claims that's not even true, which she actually told me this like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't know. And there's a few other ones. I would have been happy to have. I would have been happy to be on their channels or have them on my channels, but they decided to start disrespecting me. So I'm just like, no, why? Whereas Benjamin never disrespected me. You never disrespected me either. So it's all good, you know? So why am I gonna get involved with people who disrespect me? I don't think that's useful for anybody.
That's fair. What if like the stuff that they said behind your back, they said it to you first before they said it behind your back? Like they've already said it to you, like directly, without you talking.
Not always. I mean, Eric Thor never did actually.
No, I mean not him, but like what if like I know your problem with Eric Thor. I had like the same problem as you was with him, but like what about like the other the other people? Like this is just hypothetical, right? It's not concrete, but like what if one of those people was quite like transparent with you? They're like, Chase, I think this and this thing that you said is crap, is garbage. But they said it to you first, and then after they said it to you, they went to other forums and said it too. So is that okay then? Because they said it to you first. It's like they were transparent with it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's fine. I don't see why that's an issue, I guess. But I never really even had an opportunity. I mean, like for example, with talking with famous people, right? He just started making videos, getting all cranky, and I'm like. And I made one video to refute what he was saying, and it just turned into a lot of fun drama, which just earned me more views. So I was like, okay, sure. But at the same time, I'm just like, what a waste. I don't want to get involved, but then again, like I provided my own video responses. Then I heard later that YouTube was heavily looking down on creators who are doing, response videos to certain things. And I didn't really want to get involved with that. The channel's still pretty young, and I'm just like, nah, no. I mean, I'm just going to ignore these people and focus on helping people. I do that best anyway, so that's fine. I've never heard of Dave Powers talking crap about me behind my back or anything. Maybe he did. I don't know, but I like Dave Powers. The problem is that as an ENTP, we often like people who hate our guts. So
Really?
Yeah, it's very common for us, sadly. But yeah, it's that's just kind of just how it is, But I do have somebody in mind, perhaps.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I was just curious why that was the case, because when I heard you say that to Benjamin, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder, like, what's the backstory behind that? But yeah, that's super cool, man. Thanks for sharing the backstory with that. Well, thanks again, Chase, for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. I like how approachable you are and easy to talk to you. I think that really helps. And yeah, I think that just makes you, for me, I put you higher up. Like as one of the cooler people. It's easy to talk to.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, man. I appreciate your high opinion of me.
Yeah. Just plainly because you are honest and you're approachable. I don't really ask for much. It's just those two, and it's you got that, man. And you have a big focus on helping people too. So I think that's really cool too. All right, dude. I'm gonna go on my road trip. So thanks again for doing this interview with me.
Have fun.
And peace out.
Yep. Later.